Hello, and welcome to All the Grief, a regular podcast for all those who have been touched by grief. We are your hosts. I am Rebecca Luttrell.
And I am Andrea Giron Mathern. We are two friends, a therapist, and a social scientist, both highly sensitive, fellow grievers, here to share our hearts as we talk about all the grief.
Good morning, Andrea.
Good morning, Rebecca.
How are you this morning? How is your heart?
My heart is, I'm prepared for this question, yet I'm like, gosh, how is my heart? My heart this morning is pretty light. I got to spend some extra time with the boys yesterday and kind of made it through Mother's Day. I don't love Mother's Day. I do it for everybody else. But I wish we could just not do anything special. So I made it. So I'm glad I made it through Mother's Day. Now I just have to make it through my birthday, which is also tough for me. I think I just don't like people having a whole day of things for me. It's just too much attention, too much pressure. And I'm I really just enjoy little things let's go to the park and have a picnic together. It feels like too much pressure. So I'll be ready for all of these things to be over. How is your heart?
This morning, my heart is just pensive. I feel in this really reflective place. I have a solid set of really good friends, and I think that I'm a really good friend. And there's a friend who's sort of struggling right now. And as I'm making more contact with her, I'm sort of realizing that I dropped her, but she's not struggling with me, but just sort of I dropped our friendship in a way that I always feel really aware when someone does that to me, but I didn't feel so aware that I had done it. So I'm just I could reach out more and sort of be a better friend in that way. And also, as you were just talking about Mother's Day, I'll say, I think I like being celebrated in general. I think there should be more days to celebrate me in the year. And I love it. I often forget not everyone loves Mother's Day. And so I've also been a little reflective on, did I reach out to people who I know had complicated relationships with their mothers or people who've lost children? And so I'm just thinking about, how to be better at tuning into that when I'm doing great doesn't always mean everyone else is. So thanks for bringing that here today.
Sure. Also, I will offer you that those of us that have a hard time on that day generally reach out to each other. So we're not usually left totally hanging. So
oh, that's sweet.
Yeah. Well, I'm so excited. Today we have a guest on the show. His name is Adam Zuckerman. He is the founder of Buried in Work, which is an e-commerce platform leading in the area of specializing in estate planning and organization and end-of-life tasks, as well as estate transitions. He has a deeply personal motivation to this work, which stemmed from his experience managing his own father's estate. Adam is dedicated to simplifying these complex processes for individuals and families across the nation. As an Eisenhower Fellow attorney and MBA, Adam brings a wealth of expertise to his role, combining legal knowledge with entrepreneurial vision to drive innovation in the field of estate planning. Adam's mission is to empower individuals of all ages to navigate the intricacies of estate planning with confidence and ease. Through Buried in Work, he seeks to revolutionize the way people approach end-of-life preparations, ensuring that everyone has access to the resources they need to secure their legacy and protect their loved ones. So, with that beautiful introduction, Adam, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Andrea, Rebecca. It's great to be here. And the funny thing is that throughout my life, people oftentimes confuse me for an Andrew, and Andrew is actually my father's name.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
You're not alone. Over and over and over throughout my life, I've been Andrew, Andy, and Adam. It's very strange.
Oh my goodness. Well, I do feel a little bit better. I'm also is there a famous person, Andrew Zuckerman? Why do I want to lean that way? But it must just be your dad.
It could be.
Well, Adam, we're so glad to have you. We'd love to check in with you. How is your heart this morning?
It's pretty full today. It was an interesting week. I have two friends that are in the hospital for different reasons, and both of them get to come home today. It sounds like, obviously when you get checked out, things can happen. Maybe it's an extra day or two, but if everything goes well, today's going to be a great day.
Fantastic. My heart is with them too, that everything goes well and they are home.
Yeah.
Well, we'd love to sort of have you kick this off and tell us your story of what got you to starting Buried in Work.
Yeah, it was an unexpected twist. Like a lot of people, I was working just a little bit too much. One year I was on 54 flights, mostly international, literally flying to Brazil for work. And then I had to be in Brussels the next morning. Just crazy. So I took some time off from work, resigned, and I thought I'd have some time off. And my father was at my house and we were doing some woodworking in the basement. And he walked up the stairs to the deck afterwards and he turned around. He said, "Adam, I'm tired." And when the majority of people say I'm tired, it means, I want to go take a nap. right? When my dad says that I'm tired, it's a little bit of a cause for alarm because 6.5 years prior to that point, he was diagnosed with leukemia for the first time. So I ended up donating bone marrow to him, which was very fortunate. I was a match. You only have a 30% chance, give or take, if you're a child to be a match. But we got him some extra time. It's fantastic. And that extra time gave him the opportunity to actually build relationships with my nieces and nephews, which is wonderful because they were younger. He relapsed again. We put him into remission again. And then fast forward to when he was walking up the stairs, things took a very quick turn. So I went to the doctor's office, checked into the hospital on a Thursday effectively, and 12 days later, he passed away. Far too fast. On the bright side of things, we got extra time. On the bright side of things, he was completely lucid until effectively the day or two before he passed. So all of the family members that needed to could come in and see him. Those that were far away could do a FaceTime or a Zoom or Skype or whatnot. And we actually got to say goodbye, which is much more fortunate than a lot of people if somebody passes away in their sleep. But the reality is that no matter how organized you think you might be, odds are there's a little bit extra that you could have done to make it easier. So I was designated as the executor in his will. My mom is still around. I've got two other sisters. And I hopped in pretty head first, to help organize everything. And I wanted to make sure that I was tracking what I was doing. I wanted to make sure that my mom knew what I was doing, that my sisters were in the loop if they were curious as well. And when I met with my mother's financial planner to show her, this is how I'm transitioning these accounts, this is the information I found, this is that. At the end of the conversation, the financial planner said, this is the most comprehensive transition I've ever seen in my life. Have to get this to other people to help them. I showed it to a few friends and family, different generation, sandwich generation, older generation. And overwhelmingly, the response was, I absolutely want this, either for me, my spouse, my kids, my parents. Take out your mom's information, write down all your notes, and then send it to me. And I have a bit of a tech background, so I'm an attorney, an MBA. I've worked in big companies and startups, a whole host of different things. And I put together a website in just a few days, posted it on Nextdoor, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, just to see what would happen. And within days, we had over 10,000 visitors to the website.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which was phenomenal. It rapidly shifted from just a bit of information I was putting on, hey, here's some tips, to multiple people getting involved, to us providing resources online for do-it-yourselfers and paid products for people that want a bit of a guided approach. And effectively, what we're trying to build is the comprehensive hub that if you want estate planning, estate organization, understanding the steps that you need to take to simplify those tasks before and after somebody passes away, or even educating yourself about end of life leading into estate transition and probate, one-stop shop for you. And every day we release new content and new materials, and the team's chugging along. And that's how I got to where I am. I didn't expect to be doing this full time, but I absolutely love it.
Oh,
that's great.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing the story of your dad. You're right. Like, even in every way that we might feel prepared and ready, I think Rebecca and I continue to hear, and in our own experience over and over again, when the moment comes, it's still overwhelming. It's just too real, even if you planned it. So thank you for sharing that background.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I have a question, because I didn't expect you to say that your dad's estate was so well executed. I sort of expected you to say it was a mess and I had to fix all these things, and then I wanted to save other people that. How did he know to do that? I mean, outside of having someone like you, somehow he knew this.
That's a great question. And I think it's actually both sides of that equation. So he was very organized, but it was also a mess.
Okay.
It wasn't that it was like, oh, here's this booklet, I've done everything for you. It was, here's a bunch of my accounts with a username and password that might be correct. And there's multiple usernames and multiple passwords for the same account. And here's where I have the majority of my XYZ. Go figure it out. The file's on the computer. But what I rapidly found was that the average estate in the United States to administer takes 570 hours of time. I don't know about you, but it's pretty difficult to find 570 hours just laying around, course of 6 months, a year, 2 years, however long the administration part plays out. And what I realized very quickly was that, and I'll draw an analogy. Let's say that the three of us, so Adam, Rebecca, Andrea, are going to make a cake, right? You guys are coming to my house, we're making a cake. If I invite you over, and when you get to my house, I say, guess what? We're making a cake. I don't have a recipe. I don't know how long it's going to take. I also don't have any ingredients at my house. Make the cake. It's going to be pretty difficult to make that cake. We need to figure out what we need to make. We need to go to the store and get the ingredients. And then if it gets even more complicated, if I go, I'm not even going to tell you what ingredients I have in my house, but you can only use them, go and search. Now it's going to be even more complicated because you've got a scavenger hunt on top of everything. And that's the problem that a lot of people are facing, and I faced in a lot of ways as well, is that I was on a scavenger hunt to find things that I think existed, but wasn't exactly sure. Whereas if my dad took a little bit of extra time to say, this is exactly what it is, here's the statement document, here's this, here's that, I could have stepped in and made that cake really easily. So if you came over to my house and I had all of the ingredients in one place with a recipe, the kitchen was clean, and I said, let's make a cake, great, let's hop in. We've got a cake to make.
Yes, that makes so much sense. And just as you're talking and you say the thing about the passwords, I'm like, oh my gosh, let's just start there. It's going to be a nightmare for someone. I can't remember my passwords.
I had to change like my iCloud password yesterday because I couldn't remember it. And then I was like, did I write that down anywhere, or am I going to have to change that too?
And that's the thing. So the old joke in the estate planning industry, if you're an attorney, is somebody asked you, well, how do I figure out what accounts they had? So just watch the mail, because you'll get your account statements. You know, it's easy. You just wait a few months, check the mail, and you're good to go. But today, with everything paperless, with our digital legacies, it's the mail, but it's also your entire online persona. What happens to your Facebook page? What happens to your LinkedIn page? What happens to the photos on your phone? How do you access that? And one of the things that we're trying to do is put together these deals online. So you can come to the webpage, and we've negotiated a family-based password manager at discount. You get 25% off one password. And now if something happens to you, your entire family can get immediate access to your accounts like they need to. Your digital legacy is something that a lot of people just don't realize is there. And it's becoming a very important part of estate planning and then that transition process.
Absolutely. I also am curious because you were already the sort of executor. And I imagine in families, that's a pre-conversation that you have to have, right? Like your dad, your mom, you all had to be thinking about that already for there to be an executor.
You would hope that is the truth for most people.
Sure.
In my instance, I think my parents told me once that I was the executor on their will. I had never seen their will.
Okay.
So one of the things that's really neat, wills and trusts. So I like stats, and I'll throw a few out there. Only 1/3 of Americans actually have a will or a trust. However, 100% of Americans have an estate plan. And what's interesting about that is that if you don't have a will, if you don't have a trust, your estate plan is dictated by the state. It's called intestacy law. Your will goes through the intestate process. So that's first thing, like, okay, you may not have anything to do, but if you don't, that means somebody's going to dictate it for you. If you do make a will, you don't have to tell anybody that they're in it, but we highly recommend that you do, because it makes things a little bit easier and people can actually decline in some ways. So if you have minors, if you have dependents, you may have a guardianship designation in your will, but your friend might not want your kids. Probably a pretty good idea to ask them. So I was fortunate that my parents did tell me, hey, you're the executor of the will, but we did not sit down and go through everything like, this is this line of the will, this is this line of the will. I didn't see the will until after my dad passed away.
Right. I'm the executor of my mom's will. She handed it to me 15, 20 years ago, and I've never opened it. I mean, it was sealed. And then I asked her at one point, hey, should you update this? Like, it's been a while, because I was the designated guardian for my youngest siblings, who we have 20 years difference. And she said, no, it's all the same. But I doubt that. I feel like so much has happened in her life. But I think it's a hard thing for people to visit. And I'm curious, probably by the time they're coming to you, there's less resistance. But I know just for myself, I have a friend who's been doing a lot of end of life planning, and we talk about it, and she does it for people, but doing it for herself was so much harder, because she was like, what do I want to leave for my daughter? I'm going to write these letters every year. There were all these emotional pieces that come up. And I'm going to sort of like jump to the punchline of that. What I assume is doing it as an act of love for the people that you're leaving, and that like going through this discomfort myself probably is really important to save people a lot of headache on the other end. So yeah, I'm just curious what you run into in terms of people's emotional blocks around it.
Absolutely. First of all, you should have your mom update the will and just read through it to make sure that it's current.
I don't want to be the guardian of 20-somethings. They're good.
Some things just time out, but if she has new houses, if she's moved, maybe her thought process on so many different things could have changed.
She listens to this podcast. She'll catch what you said.
You're talking straight to Rebecca's mom.
Rebecca's mom, go, please, just read through it once. And if you say nothing's changed, then you can tell Rebecca I told you so.
She'll love that.
A lot of people do come to us and they're at different points in their lives. So if you want to group it into 3 different groups, one is, let's say, the 60-year-olds and older. Every single day, 10,000 people in the United States actually turn 65. Not exactly, but on average. That means that by the end of the decade, the number of people that are 65 and older will have doubled since now. And there will be more people over 65 in America than under for the first time in history. At the same point in time, the sandwich generation, those that are taking care or helping to take care of their parents and their families or kids, 15% of those are actually financially supporting their parents in some way as well. So there's a lot of moving pieces. We've had people 60, 65 and older that have come to us and said, hey, I want to get things in order for me, for my spouse, for my kids, for others. We've had sandwich generation come to us and say, I just had a wedding and now I want to get everything in order. I had a baby, a life event. You really should be revisiting this type of thing every time you have a major life event. And I also want to get this for my parents. So we've seen people buy some of our products like the estate preparation package. It takes everything that we have in our do-it-yourself materials. So organizing family information, that includes your pet information, your citizenship information, identifications, your career and education history that goes to benefits, your residential history that helps you find unclaimed property, your digital legacy, that's email, online accounts, passwords, your computers, your phones, your devices, very important. Financial assets, financial liabilities, business interests, insurance information, tax returns, health and medical information, who you want to contact. And that doesn't even get into like your actual documentation for living wills, healthcare proxies, DNRs, pulse, powers of attorneys, all that, right? So there's a lot that you have to do. You can't do everything in one day. And depending on where people are in their lives, they're coming to us to either help them get organized or to find out how they can convince somebody in their life to get organized so their life is a little bit easier. So you're right. When people do come to us, they generally have a question, but oftentimes it's coming to us a question about somebody else that they're trying to convince. That's like, my kids have the key to my safe. They're totally fine. And that's not sufficient. Promise.
It's so much easier to ask for someone. I'm asking for a friend.
I think the other thing that I hear too is there is this misconception out there that things like estate, I think, are like social culture of a will, right? It's like all these wealthy siblings sitting around waiting to hear what their inheritance is. And so I think there's this idea that like the average person doesn't need to leave a will and doesn't need to estate plan, because I think we think of it as a really wealthy person's problem.
Yes, I love that. And I actually had a conversation with somebody about this yesterday. If you're a Netflix fan, there's a Guy Ritchie show now called The Gentleman. In the first episode, it's in England, and everybody's sitting around the room as the attorney walks in with a leather portfolio. And this is the reading of the will. Not how it happens oftentimes. Drama in media is fantastic, but that's really not how it usually happens. On the one hand, yes, if you have a lot of assets, it's probably a pretty good idea for you to go through the entire process with an attorney, with financial planners and whatnot to get everything in order, because it can save you time, hassle, money, and your family the same stresses. On the other hand, if you don't have a lot of assets, you still may want to consider it, but maybe you can do it yourself. You come to the webpage and you learn that in this specific state, you have to have this amount of signatories. It has to be notarized. It doesn't, to make your will legally binding. But what I think is the biggest common misconception about estate planning and estate organization is that people think it is literally just the will. And that is so far from the truth. The will is a foundational element that says, yes, this is what I want to have happen to my assets. But it doesn't answer the question of, do you want to be on life support? What do you want to have happen at your funeral? Who do you want to have speak? There's so many other things that you need to be considering, because comprehensive financial planning, comprehensive estate planning means that if you get hit by a bus and you don't die, that you are incapacitated, that you just get older and your mental capacity is reduced and you have to go into palliative care or a nursing home or assisted living or something else, that your family is able to step in and pick up the pieces and support you, and your friends can support you in the way that you want. Because what happens is, if you lose your voice, somebody else is going to make those decisions for you, and you might not like that. So estate planning is pretty simple. Yes, it has a will. It may have a trust. It may have other things involved, but it's not just the transition of your assets. It's everything leading up to that point that is before you pass away, immediately after you pass away, and then long after you're gone.
Oh, that's so helpful. I mean, I feel like, well, this of course, this comes up for Rebecca and I a lot because we're constantly talking to people about like death and dying. But, but that piece around funeral planning and, sadly, having just gone through it many times, 3 times in the fall, to like involved, it is those small details that like the music that you want or who you want to speak that I think sort of get lost, and you have 8 people or 4 people or however many people thinking about what their vision of that funeral is, and those rarely align. And so sort of dictating what you want your final celebration to be, Rebecca, putting that out there, I just think makes it so much easier. There are so many other details that your family is going to have to deal with when you pass, that those things feel so important to me.
You can do it on your own. You can figure it out and write down. You can come to our website and get like high-level overviews. We have forms that are available, multi-pages of literally, here are all the questions that you should answer about your funeral, about final burial place. Do you want a green burial? Do you want cremation? What type of cremation do you have? Who do you want to have speak? Do you want pallbearers? Literally, it's all laid out for you. Or you can get the really big package, the estate preparation package, that has everything you can think of. It's far too comprehensive. You're never going to be able to fill everything out. That's intentional. But every bit of information that you put in is going to help you. But literally, it's key contact information. If you pass away, who do you want to be notified first? Who's most important that they get to see you, right? These are the things that you really need to be thinking about. What is that legacy? Do you want to have legacy messaging? So I want this person to hear this message from me, recorded, written down, otherwise, after I pass away. For me, and this is something I get choked up about a little bit, one of my favorite times in the last week that we had with my parents, with my dad. My mom was in the room, my 2 sisters were in the room, some other family members were in the room, and we just started asking my dad questions. Tell me one more story about when you were a kid. Tell me a story about this. What do you want us to remember about that? And we ended up releasing 2 games just a few weeks ago. You can get them on the website. They're card games that are the question prompts. So one is called One More Story, that asks 126 of those questions. People are using them to connect with their grandparents, with their parents. Father's Day is coming up. Get it for that. Also, just their friends are sitting around. And the second game, which is sort of like the estate preparation package, but really light because you can't do everything last minute. Nothing left unsaid. That helps you have those prompts of what would you like to have happen at your funeral? What do you believe? Do you have a trust? Where are your hidden valuables, if you have any, things like that. But the fact of the matter is that starting these conversations, and this goes back to Rebecca's question earlier, starting these conversations can be really difficult. So we've come up with gamified solutions like the cards. We have an online quiz now. It takes 2.5 minutes that you can take for yourself or somebody else's estate to see how prepared you are. And then based on your score, it'll say, you're in a good spot, don't worry about it, or ooh, you should probably do a little bit. And then there's even prompts that you can cut and paste that you can put into an email or send in a text. Mom, I just took this estate preparation quiz and I'm kind of surprised by the results. Can we talk? Starting the conversation is difficult, but once you start it, it tends to get a little bit easier. So that's what we're trying to do.
Absolutely. I did see those cards and I love them. I love the idea of, I think before my grandmother passed, it was sort of, she was 96. So we knew, we were already felt like we were on really lucky borrowed time. But I remember the urgency of wanting to just record hearing her voice, because you just never knew if that was going to be the last time, or her telling you a story. And just for her, she just got a little less sort of there toward the end. I mean, she was there emotionally and present and happy, but not necessarily able to recall super fine details. So I loved those cards, especially as they do feel like a game, and other games that, people probably play when they're together with their families. So it felt like such a great entry point to having some way to get to these questions and get to these answers. So I thought that was such a beautiful touch to do.
I do want to kind of interrupt, because as you were sharing that, I was thinking, what was the story that stood out to you the most from your dad in that time?
There's so many. I'll give you my favorite memory of that day, which is related. We're telling jokes, we're telling stories. And my dad had a very funny, creative sense of humor. He built birdhouses, whimsical Dr. Seuss birdhouses. The nurse comes into the room, and without missing a beat, he turns to her and says, "Hey, nurse," and he probably knew her name at the time because he's been there so long and he's first name basis with everybody. "Hey, nurse, do you know why a giraffe's neck is so long?" And she looks at him like he's crazy. And without missing a beat, he goes, "So it can reach its head." Like, it's just silly things like that you're not going to have the opportunity once somebody is gone to hear such a stupid dad joke. But it's just so quintessentially my dad. It's perfect.
I love it. He gave you that one last dad joke. Also, my boys are 6 and also share dad humor. They will enjoy that joke quite a bit. It will live on.
You should use it. Andrew, just something you just said about your relative that was getting older and the mental capacity was slowing down just a little bit. It's better to start this whole process when you have full capability as opposed to later on in life when things might be a little bit harder. If somebody is starting to face some challenges, if things are getting to the last minute, the thing that you don't want to do is be asking them about passwords and accounts and the wishes and things like that. So if you can actually take the time to do this long before you need to and maybe just have a few tweaks and updates at the end, it's going to save you more time to have better conversations, better memories, and make the whole process easier on everybody, as opposed to trying to cram things in because you'd be surprised if you ask a question, the rabbit hole goes. So sooner is better.
Yeah. Well, and I do feel a little curious because, I mean, I knew that was probably true, that just having a will is not enough for a lot of reasons. And I don't think my dad had a will. And when he died, there was an estate plan. And it was the state of Louisiana. So every state is different, I imagine. And so suddenly his then wife, found herself that our house was half owned by her 3 stepchildren. And she was just like, oh, can I please keep the house? And I don't have much money. And can I just give you $2,000 each? And we were like, that's fine. We were like, there's nothing here, but that's not always going to be the case, that people would be willing to let you keep your house. And that something happens, I think, emotionally for people. I watched this when my grandfather died and my mom and her 5 living siblings. It's like the emotion that came up around his lack of planning that happened. I felt like they all had reverted to children, wondering who dad loved the most or something. It just really gets so sticky. And so I don't know. I think I have a question in there, but it's something around like per state, it's different. And there's so many pieces that you need to be aware of. Yeah.
That's exactly right. So every state has its own requirements and laws, and state by state can change. And there's also federal laws. A lot of people don't realize that when you pass away, somebody has to file a final federal tax return or tax return on your behalf, which is crazy, right?
100%.
Yes.
There are a lot of really intricate pitfalls that people might not realize. I'll give you 2 examples. One in similar vein, or both in similar vein to what you just mentioned. One person had a benefit package that was available to them from a former employer. And that's one of the reasons why we say write down all the benefits that are available for each of your, systems and platforms and jobs and everything else that's there. You might not know credit cards even can offer benefits for funerals and different things, but they never updated that. The person remarried, and when they went to claim the benefits, they found out that his ex-wife was going to get his benefits from his old company. So the current wife had to go to the ex-wife. Fortunately, they were on good terms, and say, hey, do you mind if you give me that money? And fortunately, it all worked out. So that's example 1. You need to go back and check that all your policies, your beneficiaries are important. Second example, we were speaking to somebody a few weeks ago from Virginia, a gentleman. He was married, got divorced, has 2 kids. He updated his will. So if something happens to him, I like to use the hit by bus example. Both of his kids would get 50% of everything. Nice and simple. So we're going through things like, what else do I need to consider? And well, have you updated all your payable on death beneficiary designations on your bank accounts? And he goes, no, I haven't gone through that. I updated the will. That's going to take care of everything. And I went, well, actually, did you know that a payable on death beneficiary on your bank account or insurance policy, those are contractual obligations, which means that gets processed before your will gets processed. So that checking account that we talked about that is just in your name that your ex-wife, I don't know why it's always ex-wives in these examples, is designated on, she's going to get the cash in that account. Your kids don't get it. Oh my goodness, I should probably go and update my payable on death beneficiaries. There are a lot of things that until you go through this, you don't know. I'll give you one more example. This one's really neat. So this is like the tips and tricks section of the conversation. If you're married, Andrea, you're married, yeah?
Yeah.
All right. You have a husband. You are now the financial planner in your house. Congratulations. Your husband is not that individual. Okay.
Okay.
You've taken out all the credit cards for your household. So let's say you have 3. You're the primary card holder on all 3 accounts. Your husband also has cards, but they're secondary card holders. If you get hit by a bus, his credit cards immediately get canceled when the credit cards find out about it because you're the primary account holder.
Oh.
So it's really important that if you do have a relationship where one person is like that primary that does all of that, you should actually take out a credit card in your name also, because you don't want all of your credit information to be canceled. You have to then suddenly apply for new credit cards. That can take a few days. You're not going to have a card for a week or two, yada, yada, yada. But there's all these little things that unless somebody points it out to you, you're not going to have any idea. And it's not because you've done something wrong. It's because systems are complicated and there's a lot that goes into this.
Yeah.
Yeah, we recently did an interview and it was an author and he was talking about his wife passing and the bank being shocking because they got married sort of later in life. So they each came in with personal bank accounts and then I'm sure had like one shared joint account, but they hadn't named each other as beneficiaries on these bank accounts they had probably had since their 20s or something. I mean, I've had mine forever. And same assumption. He totally assumed that the will would kind of like dictate everything. And he spent so much time and money. So that's sort of his talking point now. He just tells all his friends, like, make sure you have indicated your first and maybe even second death beneficiary on your bank account. But I didn't know that about credit cards.
Here's your trick for bank accounts, financial plans, financial accounts, insurance accounts. There are 3 questions that you need to ask for every single one. The first one is, what will happen to this account or policy when I pass away, right? Literally, like, as it currently stands, what happens to it? The second is, who is authorized to access and communicate with you, the institution, regarding this account and or policy when I pass away? So who's designated? That'll help you say, nobody. Well, what's the process then for me to get somebody so they can speak? Because then what happens is you have to go through the entire process of getting your letters of administration from the local court, yada, 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 before they'll even talk to anybody. And the third thing you want to know is what benefits or entitlements will be available to my designated beneficiaries when I pass away. And if you have that written down, those 3 things for every single one of your accounts in one place, whoever comes to pick up the pieces is going to be so thankful, because that means that they know what the account is, what the account information is, what it is. Like, is it a policy? Is it a bank account? Can they talk to them? If not, who can? And are they going to be able to get anything from it, any perks? And that will save so much time. So those are your 3 questions that you should be focusing on.
Yeah, I think also, like, I had this incident last year and my car got stuck in ice and I was in an area that my cell phone service was really poor and it was snowing and I was just like, oh my gosh, I could sit out here and freeze. So I like managed to get through to my partner and I was like, hey, can you call my car insurance for me and like have someone come tow me? But I was like, the call kept dropping and I'm texting. And so then he texts back, he's like, they won't let me because I'm not listed on your account. Mm-hmm. Right. And it's even things like that. It's like everything that you might need someone else to have a say in or speak for you. I mean, you have to list all the people. And I imagine that happens with insurance as well, like just health insurance.
Exactly right. Everything. In our book, we have pages and pages and pages of, down to the detail of, do you have a gardener? Do you have a security provider for your house, like a security system, internet provider, pest control, snow removal? Like, literally somebody is going to have to call everybody in your house to change things over, whether it be account, canceling, resuming service. You need to think about, if somebody's in the hospital, who's going to go and water their plants? Do they have pets? Do they have dependents? We worked with a local veterinarian even to develop our pet profile. We worked with certified financial planners to do the financial sections. Like, don't figure this out on your own. You can, but it's hard. And you ran into the exact problem that we don't want people to run into. Unfortunately, it wasn't an end of life situation for you, but think about what would have happened if it was a bad car accident, right?
Right. And then someone can't speak for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Or the family member that you don't want to speak for you speaks for you. Oh no, Rebecca really wanted to donate only her left eye. Kind of weird.
Yes.
It doesn't really happen that way, but
I know.
But I think the other thing that's so important right there. So for my dad, we had a will. My parents had sat us down, all the siblings talked us through it. So we understood sort of their financial situation and understood a lot. I will say that was before there were more kids. Like, that was before I had kids and they didn't update their will. And so I think somebody recently was like, oh, we did update my mom's will. And her lawyer said, do your taxes and update your will every year. Like, just do both of them at the same time. But those little things, so we had a will and kind of like thought we had most of it in place. We didn't, because we didn't have an estate plan. But those little things of like the gardener calling, like my mom to be like, hey, or just showing up and she's like, who are you? And it was so heartbreaking because she had to suddenly, because she still lived on her own, had to be the one delivering this news over and over again to practical strangers like my husband's gone and I don't want you to mow my lawn anymore or whatever it was, And so I think about those little things that just add up and having to just retell everyone over and over again, my partner died, that if you have it all somewhere and you have an executor, you have somebody indicated in your family, they can make those phone calls for you and it's less impactful.
And it's not just that story that's over and over and over, which is horrible. I had to go through it myself.
Sure.
Goosebumps right now because it's just so frustrating. It's the genuinely sincere, but also completely fake and manufactured. I'm so sorry for your loss. I'm so sorry for your loss. Like, okay, credit card person, are you really sorry for my loss?
Right.
I know you have to say it and you're trying to be nice and you're in this position because you're extremely empathetic. But like, I wish there was a way that you could just start the conversation and say, hey, I'm calling because somebody died. I don't want to get in the story. I don't want to hear that you're sorry for me. Let's just get through this really quickly and efficiently. Like sometimes it's nice, sometimes it's not, but that having to recount what happened over and over and over and over, it's so hard. And then you go through the year of firsts. And this is the first this without the person. This is the first year with that. It's the sorry for your loss and the year of firsts are both things that are not easy for anybody to process.
Like at all, like just generally not easy. And so to alleviate some of the tasks and some of those conversations is like a gift. It just is.
On our website, in the resources section, there's a link called templates, and we have emails that you can cut and paste that edit like this is the person's name. So you need to tell the bank this. There's your template to use it. You need to tell service provider, here's your template. Somebody told us that they were having trouble shutting down accounts. So we reached out to all the big companies in the country. So you need to shut down an Amazon account. Literally, here's the steps that you need to take to shut down Amazon. From from so many shared experiences, it is so friggin' difficult and hard and heart-wrenching and just exhausting. If anybody that's listening has an idea of a resource that you think can help anybody else, please reach out to us. We want to build it on the site, or at least consider it.
So some of these are free resources that you offer that are just on your site?
90% of it is free.
Beautiful. I love that.
So it's do-it-yourself checklist guides, a lot of information. Like if you need an estate planning attorney, here are the questions you should consider. If you want to check for unclaimed property. So any place that you've lived, if you have an account and you don't claim money after it's closed, like you get a refund, they can only hold on to that money for so long and then it goes into an account that the state or the government holds. Free searches, we've got links to every single database there. We've got the templates, we've got questions, we've got the free quizzes. Like our goal is do-it-yourselfers, come to us. If we can't help you, we're going to send you somewhere else. We just launched 9 service provider directories for attorneys and estate sales and funeral homes, cemeteries, a bunch of other things. We've got end of life and funeral planning guides based on religion. So Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, LGBTQ plus, not that that's a religion, secular. And then we've gone even further and we've taken those guides and we've informed ChatGPTs. So if you don't want to read through everything, if you're familiar with new facing technology and AI, you can have a conversation with it and be like, what do I need to know about a Jewish funeral? What do I need to know about a Hindu funeral? And it'll have a conversation back and forth with you, all for free. Our goal is let's leave the world a better place if we can. We'd love it if you buy some of our products. That's fantastic. Like the estate preparation package, like the games that we talked about, makes our lives easier so we can continue to make more products. But if you can't use the free resources, we still want you to be in a better spot.
Wow. That's beautiful.
I love the detail. My cousin passed away very suddenly in the fall. And I guess, I think my reflection, along with sort of like, if you're not wealthy, you don't need to do this, but also this idea of like, there's a certain age at which you need to start thinking about this. And he was a year younger than me. And so I think about, he had a long-term girlfriend and fiance, but fiancés are not entitled to anything legally. So everything was left to my cousin's mom. And it just automatically created like something there that didn't need to be there in terms of the negotiation and the ownership. And I think like the sudden surprising loss of him, there became more of an ownership from every side to like have a piece of him. And then there were these really sad moments where it was like his brother, who he was really close to, wanted like a jersey or a jacket or something They were both sort of like sports paraphernalia collectors. And I know my cousin would have wanted him to minimally have that. And yet, like, it had to be a conversation and he didn't end up getting it. And so it's just so heartbreaking because I'm like, even those of us who like aren't old, I mean, I'm older than I was 20 years ago and aren't wealthy, we still have something that like we would want to be sure ended up in the hands of people that we care about.
Exactly right. We have on the website, somebody in California reached out to us and said, I want my daughter to have X amount of this, or at least have access to say, I want this, but finding time for us to go through everything and her coming over, it's complicated. You know, we all have lives. So we created a family heirloom and keepsakes log where you can go around your house and you can say, this is the specific thing, and it asks for the description, the background information, and sentimental historical significance. Do you have photos of the item? Yes, no. If yes, where? Values, if you've ever had it appraised, so make, model, serial number. Insurance, is it insured? Who are your desired beneficiaries? If that beneficiary is not around, who's secondary? Specific wishes or instructions regarding the item's future use or preservation, and then additional notes or comments. And it comes like 100 worksheets, so you can do it for 100 items in your house. And this is an example of exactly that. You may think that, oh, I don't have $1 million, but maybe you've got something that you really care about that you picked up on a trip that's sentimental and you want your nephew to get it. Like I have a piggy bank that's really silly that my brother-in-law gave to me, and it's broken like 4 times, shattered. And I've literally, like a mirror, you know, you've taken the tiny, tiny pieces and I figured out how to glue it back together. There's a few tiny holes in it. But if something happens to me, I know exactly who I want that piggy bank to go to. It's worth nothing, like literally nothing. But I want somebody to have it as a gag gift. So you got to figure that out.
You know, yeah, that feels so relevant. We both are really big fans of Anderson Cooper has a podcast, and he talks about, and he interviews people about their grief because he's moving through grief. And he interviewed Stephen Colbert, and he had a story. Was it his grandmother when his grandmother died, Andrea?
Yeah.
Yeah. They had all of her stuff and it was in piles with numbers or something. And people had to go and pick one item that they wanted and then say she had requested that they like tell the story of why they wanted this item and like what the memory was. And he said it was just like such a sweet way for the whole family to connect and hear these stories. And I think that it can be so beautiful. And I love, because when you said the piece about the sentimental value, like telling the story of something like, hey, I'm not just leaving you this shirt. This shirt has like a story, you know, or whatever that is for people.
And you have to be cognizant of, you may not want it, but somebody else might want it for a silly reason. So my sister's a quilter and she wanted all of my dad's t-shirts so she can make a quilt out of those t-shirts. Like I look at the t-shirts, I'm like, oh, it's a t-shirt, who cares? But she was going to make something out of it. Some families do some really neat stuff where you'll go out and you'll buy colored stickers, like just the little circle ones that you can get for like $3 at CVS or whatever. And they'll give each of the kids, if the kids are the people who get to choose first, their own color. And they walk around the house and you put your color sticker on the thing that you want on the bottom of it. And one person goes at a time and you roll a dice to see who goes first. And that's how they figure things out. I want this first. I want this second. And those are the things that like the mom or whoever's leaving it isn't specifically creating a designation for. So maybe the wedding ring, this is going to go to this person. But if it's not in this list of, nope, I've already decided that, you guys get to choose. So maybe you do it a little bit earlier and then you can have that conversation with the person before they're gone of, I want this. This is why it means this to me. What's the story behind it, though, that the person who's still around can answer? Like, there's a lot of neat ways that you can gamify the situation and change it from loss of mourning to connected and connectedness while the person is still around.
Absolutely. And I love the idea of hearing what is special to someone else about your things, you know, like I would have assumptions about like what my sister-in-law would want or what my sister would want. But it would, maybe there's like, oh, you would wear these earrings and they just remind me of you, or who knows? So I also love like hearing from them, like taking a picture of my jewelry box and just being like, what would you want out of here and why? I love that. So sister and sister-in-law, expect that.
I love it.
Totally. Yeah. And so I want to check back in on this 570 hours situation. designation. Is that like always the case? I mean, is it something that, and how would someone actually, I always say, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? How does someone break down the 570 hours into something manageable? What's realistic?
One thing that I say far too much is you're unique just like everybody else. So the situation that you're in isn't up to you. It's up to the estate in some way. So the size of it, how organized it is. A lot of that time is the research of going into organizing and figuring things out. Some of it goes into opening up probate and going through the legal procedures if you have to. Some of it is administrating a trust or trusts if you have that. Some of it is winding everything down. In different states, you may have a simplified probate or a simplified estate transition process if the assets in the estate that have to go through that process are below a certain threshold. There is no way to say without looking at the unique circumstances of the specific estate how long it will take. But what I can say is that the more complicated it is, the longer it's going to take, the more assets that are involved, oftentimes the longer it will take unless they've taken very specific steps to make it extremely organized. And that can, expand very quickly. Do they have property in multiple states? Well, then you have to look at multiple jurisdictions. Do they have international assets? Do they have multiple wives? Do they have multiple kids? Like, there's all of these different things that come into play. On average, the stat is it takes 570 hours. Some people say it's 500 hours or more. Some people say, oh, no, it's really easy because everything was organized. And other people are still doing it 5 years down the road because things just aren't really easy. So the only thing you can do is get organized now, start somewhere and just make it easier. So maybe you can shave 100 hours, maybe it's 200 hours, and maybe that 570 would have been 770.
Okay, start somewhere.
I have a question I've been thinking about a lot. Is there, and I realize this would be like a paid service, but is there like a death concierge, like someone you hire who just calls all these people, sends all these emails, just does all the shit you don't want to do? And like, I don't know. I've just been thinking about it a lot. Like, I'm a huge proponent of like pay other people to make a living at something I am not good at, nor do I want to do. So I'm just curious if that exists.
It's a great question. And the answer, like many things, is yes and no. It's not black and white.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to give you the range. So you can come to us and you can order time. So I'm going to clarify something if I wasn't clear earlier. We don't make your will. We don't make your trust. We help you organize your information, and then you can go and find either through us or on your own a service provider to help you make that will or trust that's local in your jurisdiction. It's too personal. We don't want to do that right now. So some people say if you buy the estate preparation package, because a estate attorney costs $150 to $400 an hour, you will save more than an hour of time with that individual. So the product's effectively free, right? So I want to say, like, just very clear, we don't make the wills and trusts. Assuming that you have a will or trust, or even if you don't, something happens, you want to hire somebody. If you have a trust, there are professional trustees. If you have a will, there are professional executors, but they oftentimes have to have enough assets that they will take a percentage up to a certain amount. Sometimes it's dictated in the jurisdiction of what they can be compensated, but they'll go through everything, but you have to pay them. So if you have $50,000 in your estate, no, you're not going to hire somebody to do that. Right? On the other hand, to answer your question of sending all those emails, it's really difficult because it goes back to that earlier question that we were talking about of who's allowed to actually contact the institution on your behalf. So if they're not the actual designated representative, they're not allowed to send that email. They're going to go, thank you very much for the email. Are you the proper representative? We can't talk to you. So that gets really complicated. And then one common misconception that is somewhat tangential, I think is really important to talk about. Power of attorney. You can have a power of attorney for medical, from financial, whatnot. What that means is I'm allowed to act on your behalf under certain circumstances as they're dictated in the power of attorney. Power of attorneys can also be revoked. What a lot of people don't realize about them is that as soon as you pass away, so Rebecca, I'm your financial power of attorney. I can oversee and manage your bank accounts for you. Thank you very much for the responsibility. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Literally the second that you pass away, I lose that ability. I am no longer your power of attorney because you're not alive anymore. I can't act on your behalf. Then it goes in the estate transition side of things. So who's your administrator? Who's your next of kin? Who's the person who's supposed to be doing that? And I cannot tell you how often I hear stories of, I'm so frustrated. I'm the power of attorney. I'm allowed to talk to their bank account. They just passed away last week. What do I do? And unfortunately, guess what? That power of attorney is done. You're no longer their power of attorney anymore. So you have to really understand what you're designating, who you're designating, when they have that ability to act on your behalf, and when that ability to act on your behalf may terminate. So Something to think about.
Absolutely. Because it sounds very official for all time.
If you need help, you can hire consultative hours on our website as well, where we'll say, okay, let's talk holistically about your situation, about what we think you might need. And then we send you off in the right direction so you can go and get stuff organized. Some people have asked us to come in and we'd like to sit down and have you do the estate preparation package for us. And we go, yeah, we're happy to help and walk you through that. But the reality is you still have to be involved in the process, because you can't say, Adam, I want you to put this together, because I have to come back to you and go, okay, great. What are your bank accounts? And you're like, oh, well, here's my bank account. Oh, great. Now, what's your insurance policy? Great. Here's my insurance policy. Who do you use for your gardener? So I'll walk you through it, or Carrie will, or StarMed will, or other people on the team. But you have to be involved in the process.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Absolutely.
One thing that's neat is we have service providers that we're partnering with now. So there's Tax Prep CPA. He's purchasing these packages for his clients. There's actually several of those. We're working with cemeteries and funeral homes and a bunch of others as well, that our materials are getting pushed out both from a B2C, business to consumer, and also B2B, because a lot of people are seeing value in it, and it's a good momentum to have.
Yeah, I can imagine all of those scenarios where it's like, if my clients have this, it will make the process easier. So that makes total sense.
Yeah. And I want to speak as a person who, was in the sort of funeral planning and decision making about burial and all these things with my dad. He didn't have any of that laid out. I think that there was something about being in grief and having to make those decisions and having someone on the other end who was a salesperson kind of playing into the emotion of the grief that just made that so challenging. And it's part of why I feel really strongly about that you have to prepare everything, because in a less emotional state, I can make rational decisions about what I want, how I want to be buried, all these things, and sort of shut down any car salesman thing that's happening. But when I was in the grief, it was just like, oh my gosh, you're making me make all these emotional decisions. And I'm just like, I want the best, but we don't have any money. And, luckily my cousin was there and shut it down. So yeah, I feel like it would have been such a gift if my dad had, and he was 52, 53 when he died. And I'm getting close to that, so it's like, I don't think that any part of him was feeling like, oh, I'm close to death, but he should have done that, because it would have just allowed us to be more in our grief, even if we had to make a few phone calls.
Yeah. There are two different equations for that. One is, do you just want to write down, this is what I want to have happen at end of life, which makes things much easier. That's before you actually pass away. So that's healthcare proxy, living will, everything like that. Do not resuscitate. Your pulse, if you're familiar with that, your medical orders. But then for the funerals, you can actually buy something called pre-need funeral insurance. And what that means is you're buying it before the need of the funeral, before the need of the cremation, where everything's actually paid for and done. So as long as you go to like an in-network funeral home that's approved, but that's part of that process. Okay, you're here. You're not going to get pre-need insurance from a funeral home that you're not going to go to. Typically, people know where they want to go. You can save money. It gets put into an account. And then everything's really easy to take care of. I was fortunate to be invited out to a Funeral Director Association conference, which was surprisingly amazing. And the most empathetic, funny, like open-minded people that I've been around in a very, very long time. And what a lot of people don't realize is that the funeral industry, like you just said, we don't want the car salesman upsmanship of, oh, you really need the more expensive casket, right? That is something that does happen. But by and large, there are good and bad actors everywhere. And if you ask around, and we have questions, these are the questions you want to ask about your funeral home on the website, checklists and whatnot, you can pretty quickly figure out like, okay, this is a funeral home that is good, highly recommended, that's going to look out for my best interests. And then there are, unfortunately, some funeral homes out there that they might not be as, I don't want to say dishonest, but they might not push you as much in terms of the sales way. They're your advocate. But from my experience, the vast, vast majority of funeral directors of funeral homes, they are not ones to push, but you also have to know exactly what you want to make that process a little bit easier.
Absolutely. And I think having gone through it with my grandma, and she had some level, she had made some decisions. She had sort of picked out a casket and had a burial plot, but then there were other things that she hadn't. And it wasn't even the funeral home that was like having the like, we should get the best. It became the siblings, kind of like, this is what we should be doing, picking, everything, like which flowers to pick. And then it was like, well, who's going to pay for this? And I remember coming home to my husband and I was like, let's get out that will. Like, do we need money released immediately so our boys could cover those things, these funeral costs that kept coming up? It's like, oh, if you want a choir in the church, it's $1,000. Oh, you have to pay the priest. Oh, yeah. And I'm just like, what? Like, there's just so much involved that you don't know. So I actually really appreciate hearing about the pre-need.
Pre-need insurance is what it's known as in the industry. You can say like prepaid funeral, you'll find it. I was sitting on a plane somewhat recently and the person next to me, it's people talk. I was actually working on one of our things to see what I was doing. Started asking a question and the stories you get from people are great. She's like, listen to this. We walk into the funeral and the printed, funeral brochure, I don't know the exact program, I guess is what she called it. On the front of it, it didn't have a picture of my mom. It had a picture of my 22-year-old sister. So somebody sent in family photos and whoever made the program thought that that was a younger photo of her mom.
Oh.
So first thing, like designate, this is the photo that I'd like used in my funeral. Like there's a lot of little things if you want that. Then they get to the cemetery and her mom insisted on having her casket delivered to graveside pulled by Clydesdales. Right? It's raining out. The Clydesdales are going over the grass. They're tearing up the lawn. The funeral director, cemetery people are really upset about it. And she's like, I didn't want to spend $1,800 on renting some horses in the rain when this could have gone to something far better because like one day, one moment in time, but we did it because my mom wanted that. Like, if you really want your Clydesdales at your funeral, you need to write it down and you need to pay for it because maybe your relatives might not actually honor your wishes. They did, but there's like a lot of weird stuff that you can think of. Like it's your day. If you want to pay for it, designate your money and pay for it.
Yeah. You mentioned a DNR, which is a do not resuscitate order. What was the pulse? I don't know what that one is.
Those are portable medical orders that are binding directives of what happens to you. A lot of people talk about advanced directives, and advanced directives mean different things to different people. In some places, advanced directives are an actual legal term for specific forms in that state. Other people say advanced directives are just a collection of the living will, the healthcare proxy, your healthcare agent, your do not resuscitate, other things. So depending on where you are, you need to go and just research and see what it is. But if you're curious, it's POLST is what people talk about. There's some confusions about do not resuscitate orders. So in some instances, the DNR is I don't want you to resuscitate me if this were to happen. On the other hand, the actual DNR can also be a binding medical order that has to be prescribed by a doctor. You shall not resuscitate in this circumstance. So you really need to go and look at what your local regulations are of what's binding, because what's binding in one place might not even exist in another jurisdiction.
Thank you. There is so much.
I know. And I'm just going to bring us back into the personal. So Adam, I mean, as you were starting to prepare all this stuff for yourself, I'm sure every time you find a new layer, you're like, oh, this needs to be in that. Did anything emotional come up? Were there any points where you were like, oh, I felt some resistance or there was kind of a struggle to do this part of it?
Yeah, it's not easy. I'm somewhat in a unique situation in that my wife and I, and this is the personal side of things, we have no kids. We've got we have 6 nieces and nephews that we get to think of. We have 1 dog, we have 1 cat. So we're fairly easy to figure things out, so to speak. It's just a conversation that is not always the easiest to have, even if you have a very open relationship. What I might want is different than what my wife might want. I think the compromise is a pretty important thing. You don't have to figure everything out. You have to figure out some things, and then that some things leads to more things, and that more things lead to a more comprehensive solution. But it's going through everything. Do we want to create a trust? What type of trust? Who should help us with that trust? Do we want it to be revocable, irrevocable? What assets do we want into it? Do we want a pour over will? That means that on the time of your death, immediately your assets go into the trust. And the reason why some people do that is because trust assets don't have to go through probate. Wills are filed with the state and are public. Trust information is not. So you can have a pour over will that immediately upon my passing, my assets go into the trust. So then it's not public of what's in the will. How you organize all of that information, how you make those decisions is a personal journey. And the more people in your life, the more complicated it can be. For us, I think that we are probably the guardians for somewhere between 6 and 12 children at this time in the event that something happened.
Oh, I am too. Right. I'm like, you don't all get to fly together because I don't need to have suddenly 12 children.
You can never be on the same plane.
Right? Exactly. Everybody goes on a different flight, which on one hand is a very nice and heartwarming thing, but on the other hand is absolutely terrifying because what if something happened to everybody at the same time and we have 12 kids?
Exactly.
From 0 to 12.
Right? It's like a bad rom-com.
A TV show. Yeah.
Seriously. So that's a long answer to a short question, but we're still learning things. We're still figuring things out. Estate planning, as discussed, it's not a moment in time. It's an evolving thing. Maybe today I want to be buried, and maybe in 15 years, I don't want to take up the land, so I change it to cremation. And I am less comfortable with traditional fire cremation, and I want an alkaline water-based cremation. Or maybe I want to be turned into a tree. Or maybe I want to be composted so the worms can eat me. Maybe I want to have my bones turned into memorial rocks, which you can actually do right now. It's kind of cool. In 15 years, do I want to use AI to then listen to this conversation that we've had, take a few of my photos, upload the rest of my emails into a system. So now there's a digital avatar. So my nieces and nephews can have a conversation with me as if I'm real for the rest of their lives in AR, right? Like the level of weird things.
Or you probably even have to do things at some point that say you're not allowed to AI me.
Right.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Digital legacy. So like there's all of these different things that I said this on a podcast recently. There was a pre-Socratic philosopher. His name was Heraclitus, right? Here's your philosophy lesson for the day. And one of the things he said, and I'm going to paraphrase it, is the only constant is change.
Mm-hmm.
And that was true hundreds, thousands of years ago. And it's true going forward. And because of that, we need to think about what our legacies are. And for me, my legacy is that I don't think I'm going to be remembered in 100 years, in 300 years, definitely not in 1,000 years, right? I don't think so. So you need to leave the world in a better place. And if we can do that through Buried in Work and through other things, I think that's great. And the corollary to that is a lot of people say that, oh, the planet's doomed, climate change, it's doomed. I personally think climate change is real. I think that it is accelerated by people. But I also think the planet is totally fine. It's humanity that's potentially screwed.
Right.
Right? The planet doesn't care that they're dinosaurs anymore.
Right.
So within that bubble of thinking, plan today for tomorrow, being flexible for whatever happens down the road, and revisit that on a regular basis to make sure that your estate plan, comprehensive as it might be, aligns with what your values are at that specific moment in time. And that's really the best that you can do.
I appreciate that. I think, too, it brought up, as you asked that question, Rebecca, a couple of things that have been hard in our conversations. And one of them was who would get our children if we both passed away. And, you know, a lot of things, like it was like we wouldn't want them to leave Denver. None of my siblings, none of Bryce's siblings live in Denver. So it was like a conversation about like, if we ask someone to take our children, we're asking them to move here. You know, like, so it was just that felt important to us. And so, you know, it's just, and revisiting that, like, we'll probably feel really different about that when they're 12 than we did when they were 4. And so thinking about that, and I think the other one that was really hard that I needed to have a conversation with my entire family about was my DNR, because I do have a DNR. I need to double, triple check all those things you said. But my husband really does not like that. He's like, well, yeah, if you're like 70. And I'm like, no. You know, so I needed him to understand why. So I shared with him all of my research about why. But it was a really difficult conversation because we feel really differently about it. So those two things came up for me in that question, Rebecca, and then really appreciating what you said, Adam, about like, and revisiting it because you'll feel differently.
Yeah. Well, it does constantly change. And it's interesting. I mean, my daughter's dad and I are not a couple anymore. And even when we were together, we could never settle on someone because it was like, but this is my dear friend who like, we didn't have a common person. And then once we separated, there's not an answer to this question. I'm just throwing this out there as like, it's a moment of heaviness for me. But I think about if I die and her dad would have custody of her, she doesn't just lose me. She loses my partner, who is effectively her stepdad right now, and her stepsister, his daughter. It's like all the connection that sort of gets lost. And there's not, I tell him like, stay in her life, but he's not going to have split custody with my ex. She's not going to see them half of the year. And it's just like that heartbreak and all the conversations I have with my partner. We're not married at this point in Colorado. We're common law married, but I don't know what that gets us. But I say to him, like, we have to be really intentional. There isn't necessarily a default about, would you be allowed to make any medical decisions for me if I don't say it? Yeah.
So what I'm hearing from both of you is that you'd like listeners to drop in the comments if you'd like to have power of attorney and responsibility and guardianship for children for both Rebecca and Andrea. You'll have a house left to you in Denver.
Reach out.
I have the job description.
Beautiful. Gosh, it feels like we could talk forever about this. I'm always sort of watching the time, but I just appreciate really, the part about leaving the world a better place. And I feel your heart in all of this and in creating what you've created, having so much of it be accessible to anyone. Yeah, it's really beautiful.
It really is. Yeah.
It's not just me. There's a lot of people that are involved that are experts in their fields that are really doing a lot to turn this into something helpful and great and resourceful for a lot of people. I'll end on two things. One, come find us, buriedinwork.com, really easy. If you want to email me, adam@buriedinwork.com. And the single most important takeaway that I can leave everybody with is that Rebecca's mom should go to the website. There's a quiz that you can take. It'll take you 2.5 minutes to figure out how organized your estate actually is. And then after you take that quiz, you should have a conversation with Rebecca.
Yes. Well, I'll take it with you. I'll do it too. So that's my offer, Mom.
There you go. Do it separate and then compare what your answers are.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
So one is for you, one is for someone else's, and you'll have a 2 and she'll have a 10. And the mom, like, clearly there's something going on here. We got to chat.
Totally. Love it.
I love it. Well, thank you so much. So we usually end by talking about how we've been touching into our grief this week. So we'll invite you to do it too. We'll give you a little bit of time, but I'll start with you, Rebecca. How have you been touching into your grief this week?
I'm always touching into my grief, but this morning, how Instagram just randomly shares things with you. And it was someone had taken a camera and positioned it on the Milky Way so that it constantly stayed connected to the Milky Way. And it actually showed how our planet rotates. And when I was watching it, I was really feeling it. I was like, oh, we are on this ball floating through space that's like, I could feel how we were rotating. And it brought so much grief up in that way of the awe and beauty and how it just like grief gets coupled with that. So it's just in this sort of wow kind of grief this morning. Yeah, that's where I am. What about you, Andrea?
I'm still sort of in a tender season of grief of, the loss of my dad. And then these holidays that just were forever sort of stained. It was like Mother's Day came so quickly after his passing, and it just felt like not at all what you wanted to be doing. And then my birthday, graduating with my PhD, like all these things that happened in May, and a really good friend of mine whose birthday is also in May and Mother's Day, and she lost her mother just a few months after Mother's Day. But it's just such a tender season where the loss and the years, the distance between the last time I heard his voice, it's just such a reminder of how that gap just gets longer and longer. So I sort of just remain in this sort of very tender season of grief throughout the month. So I'm just in it right now.
Thank you. What about you, Adam?
Adam.
For me, my grief is pretty personal and always there, especially in conversations like this, because it always goes back to the relationship that I had with my father and what we're working on. My office looks over a bit of grass with a garden behind it that a bunch of animals use as a chute. So I watched deer go by and birds. And this week, a fox ran by, stopped, looked straight at me, and had a chipmunk hanging out of its mouth.
Oh.
So second chipmunk he got that morning. And it's one of those weird things where it's like, okay, the fox needs to eat too. It's a full circle of life. Things happen. On the one hand, like I feel really bad for the chipmunk. He's really cute. On the other hand, I want the fox to be pretty happy too. And just putting it all in perspective, like we're all just part of this ecosystem, and things ebb and things flow. And one of my friends, Brian, said one of the truest sentences I've ever heard, in that it will never get better, but it will get easier. So that's how I'm handling grief.
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
It will never get better, but it will get easier. Well, thank you. Thank you for coming on, being so generous with your resources and information and the learning and how you've turned it into tactical things that people can do in a way that is so much less intimidating. So it's wonderful. I'm so glad that we're connected. We will share your website and any socials that you have, but we want to just thank you again for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Rebecca, Andrea, thanks so much for the time. And again, come find us, buriedinwork.com.
Perfect.
Beautiful.
Love y'all.
Thanks.
Love you. Bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of All the Grief. You can find us on Instagram at All the Grief Pod. And please take a moment to rate our podcast and share us with your friends. We'd love to keep expanding our reach to all the people who could benefit from conversations on grief. Take care.